Good. I work tonight. Dishes. I took Friday, Saturday, and Sunday off. For this week and next week.
I took a Thursday, Friday, Saturday off.
Well,
I don't remember.
you already have Sundays off.
All right, people, we are ready to look at this last section. So let's close up our laptops, phone.
I don't think businesses are allowed to be open on Christmas.
Do what?
My business
Are you
is
allowed to be open on Christmas?
Okay, well, here's the thing. I obviously don't have a business, and I've never had to work on Christmas. But if you're a business, you would have to weigh the debt it's going to cost you to stay open on Christmas versus how much money you're going to make. So if you're talking about like a restaurant staying open on Christmas, I mean, they would have to.
I mean, we're not open on Thanksgiving, so why would we be open on Christmas?
Yeah, I don't know. Like certain places, now this year it won't be, but like movie theaters are open on Christmas because that's like a thing, right? You could go to movies in the evening.
It's because like Christmas is in the morning.
Right.
Yeah, but I feel like more people go out to eat on Thanksgiving than Christmas.
I don't know.
That'd be whack.
I don't know.
I
wouldn't want to work on Christmas, but what I do know is that a lot of people are scaling back instead of like Black Friday and all that stuff. But anyway, all right. So we are looking at the South and West transformed. Our last section is transforming the West. So we've looked at the South, how the South had to go through Reconstruction. We've looked at how Indians were treated as that movement went west. And now we're going to look at transforming the West and moving a vast number of people into what was previously fairly wide open spaces. And one of the things that's going to bring people out to the West first will be mining. And this will be the opportunity, especially in 1849, to find gold. And if any of you pay attention to sports, you know, those San Francisco people are called the 49ers. And the reason being is gold is discovered in California in 1849. Can you not find it, sweetie? Keep going. It's because they're all on one page. Did we not finish the other set of notes? Yeah. We didn't?
Well, I don't know if we do section 2 on Tuesday.
We did. That was the lecture online. Yeah. It's there. So that you need to go back and listen to it. Yeah, shish kebab. You did. But it's all there waiting for you. It's all there waiting for you. So after the Civil War, the West is transformed by these 4 things: mining, ranching, farming, and railroads. Mining first is going to create this gigantic boom. And this boom is going to be kind of weird population-wise because it's really going to be a lot of men. A lot of men will come west trying to find gold. They'll leave their families back home. And for the most part, none of those people get rich. The people that get rich will be people that sell stuff to miners, like this guy named Mr. Levi Strauss, who sells canvas tents. And then because these miners are working in rugged conditions and not in places where they can wash their clothing very often, the miners say, hey, can you come up with some new pair of pants? Thus, we get Levi's. He makes a lot of money, not finding gold, but selling supplies. Eventually, we're going to move to gold and silver mines in Nevada, in the Black Hills, Pikes Peak. But this gold spreads everywhere. It's not just in the people in the United States coming. It attracts people everywhere. And so we get these mining towns. And I'm sorry that picture's so blurry. But that's a picture that I actually took. A little California mining town. And typically what happens in these mining towns is there's a couple of things that will come first. The very first thing that will come will be some type of assayer's office that will give you the claim or your deed for that part of land that you want to hopefully find gold. And also at that assayer's office, they will weigh your gold. You can bring in your gold dust and they'll trade it for money. Then the next thing that's usually built is some kind of saloon, some place to get a drink, and there's often women there. The next one is usually some kind of general store so that the men can buy things, and then followed closely by usually some kind of law enforcement or a hotel. It'll explode, it will boom up, and then as soon as that happens, somebody will find gold somewhere else and they will collapse. So settlers will flood into these areas not prepared for people. And if we look back at that picture, most of these places, there's nothing, right? And so these boom towns are going to explode overnight, just these huge towns. Leadville, Nevada City, Denver, Boise, Helena, those all stayed, obviously. Denver's still a town, Boise's still a town, but many of them were going to become ghost towns. And if you ever travel out west, that's usually one of the fun stops to stop at, is an old ghost town that has been kind of changed over into kind of like a Branson type of place where you can roam the streets. My parents, when we were in Flagstaff, Boot City, not that Boot City, but Boot City and Boot Hill have like this whole ghost town reenactment thing, except, and I don't know, like my parents were weird parents, and I don't know that they didn't need to think like, hey, it's maybe a good idea that we tell our 6-year-old and 5-year-old children that what they're about to see is a reenactment. There's really not going to be a shootout in the middle of the street. You can just put in the box, Scott, and people are going to shoot people and die. It's fake. They didn't tell us that. Traumatized me for quite some time, and they couldn't figure out why it was so bad. It looks real. Same like when we were my parents took us to Tweetsie Railroad, and we're riding in this railroad, and all of a sudden the railroad gets robbed. And again, I'm like 8. I don't know that this isn't real. I don't know that real cowboys haven't gotten on this car and with guns and are taking us hostage. Burst into tears. Those were not fun vacations. My parents thought it was hilarious. They thought it was so funny. Yeah, they are not. Yeah. Most towns were lawless, run by vigilante justice. And vigilante justice is exactly what that is. You take the law into your own hands. No one is tried for a crime. No one is charged with a crime. And most often, the wrongdoers will be hung without any kind of trial. Often, the law enforcement that we do have walk a fine line of, are they good guys? Are they bad guys? And that's what makes the West that whole wild, wild West kind of thing, because you never know who is good and who is bad. Small operators use place mining, mine tops with soil and stream beds with sluice boxes. Those sluice boxes are probably what you have seen if you've ever seen anybody looking for gold. They take what looks kind of like a sieve, a box, and they scrape the bottom of the riverbed and then shake it through and hope that gold pops up on the top. Later, large companies are going to come in for deeper deposits, and they're going to use TNT to explode and mine. What we won't know at that time is how damaging it is to the environment, and more importantly, how damaging it is to water sources. Those water sources are going to be moved, and the water will be used to do things like that. And especially when we're talking about the West, when there's not a lot of water sources available, for them to remove that and change the flow of those beds will be very destructive to the environment. So again, a really bad picture, I'm sorry. So this is one of the things where that water has changed the environment. This used to be, and it's such a bad picture. You can see like this is the roots of the tree. This used to be a whole big, huge cliff. You could see all the rubble. And so what they've done is they've shot this water cannon to just peel back all of that and put all that rubble down at the bottom, which then changes the flow of the river. And it's really disastrous to the environment. We don't know yet, again, a lot about how this is going to change the environment. The short little reading you're going to read today will be one of the first people that starts to take concern about what this mining and this activity is doing to change the environment. It takes us a while to figure it out, especially out west, where there's not a lot of people living, and we're not as concerned about protecting that since there's not a lot of people there. We've talked about railroads a lot. Again, in this chapter, we look at the railroads, those two those two private companies, the Central Pacific, that's going to start in San Francisco, the Union Pacific, that's going to start in Omaha, and then meet up at Promontory Point in Utah. Again, I find it incredibly fascinating that without really phones yet at this point, without any type of communication device, obviously no computers, laptops, calculators even, that they can start these two projects at opposite ends of the country and build them so that they actually meet. It is definitely a engineering feat for these men at this time. Projects supported by loans and land grants, and then again, they're going to meet at Promontory Point in 1869, and this will be over 2,000 miles of railroad. Again, and as I just said, we talk about it like it's an engineering feat, which it is, but along those 2,000 miles, that has drastically changed the environment of which those, especially Indians, will be living, and especially things like buffalo, ground cover, all of that stuff. And I'll go back if you need this one. So here we are at Promontory Point. Both of those and all the people, they've got their champagne, they meet. A lot of people say, oh my gosh, now what happens? They have two engines at the same front. If you live on my side of the railroad tracks, you see train engines going backwards all the time. That's the awesome thing about those engines. They can go backwards. So they're just going to bump it and then send it backwards. But that was a awesome meeting at Promontory Point in Utah to connect those two railroads. And so now we are able to move very freely across the United States. And again, we've talked about this a lot. The effects of the railroad accelerated the settling of the West, united the East and West Coast, but it is going to be devastating to the American Indians. This will be one of those other things that really begins the end of the American Indian, along with disease, killing of the buffalo, and the railroad. 10 territories are going to become states between 1864 and 1896. And again, this isn't part of our course because we studied this in History 101. But in order to become a state, you have to go through a territorial process. So you start with, you can become a territory when you have 60,000 people. The next leap is 100,000. When you have 100,000 people, you can apply for statehood. And one of the things that is awesome about our founding fathers and setting up the Constitution and the Northwest Land Ordinance and all the things that they did is when the states became states, they became equal states. And I think we just accept that because that's the way it is. But those 13 colonies sure could have had it well within their right to say, hey, we're the 13 best colonies, and we're going to maintain this power structure up here. And when all you other states come in, you're going to be underneath us. We're going to maintain this core 13. And I think it's really important to understand in that idea of democracy, which our Constitution, country based on, did not set up a system that certain states were better than others, that all these states that come in 1896 were given the same rights as those original 13 colonies. And I know that's kind of outside of our learning History 102, but I think it's important to understand that how important that part of the Constitution was. I think we've seen this map maybe before. Those weird railroad tracks in Iowa and Michigan and Minnesota are railroads that are getting grain and agricultural products to a market. And the markets will be these big central places, St. Louis, Kansas City, and Denver, getting all of that there. But as you see, that is a lot of railroad tracks that will be built. Still, if you look at the South comparatively, Still not a lot of railroad tracks as compared to these other places. And that will take a long time before the South catches up with the rest of the country as a result of the Civil War. All that fighting that took place for those 4 years in the South, again, will be really devastating for the South to reconstruct itself. Next will be cattle. So this becomes a place to range cattle. Cowboy culture originated with Mexican culture, the vaqueros. So everything we think about cowboys that we think is uniquely our Western story is not. It all comes from Mexico. Mexico had controlled that Southwest area for some time, and they were very much a part of that cowboy culture. We're going to raise longhorn cattle in Texas, and that's exactly what they are. They have these gigantic horns, and the reason we have those in Texas is they're very I don't know if hardy is the word, but they can withstand a lot of different types of environmental conditions. I know that most of us can imagine that it's very hot there, but because it's a desert, Texas, those deserts are also cold at night. So those deserts get really cold at night. The heat is bad, the cold is bad. There's not a lot of food to eat, and so they are a really hardy type of cattle. And I know hardy is not the word I'm looking for, but they do very well. That's an open range system. Cattle are going to roam freely, and the reason they can do that is because they're branded. So they will brand their cattle with their marking, and then they just all intermix with each other. And then at a given time, all of them will be rounded up and they'll be taken to market. And when they get into these markets, when they get into Dodge City and Kansas City, that's when they'll be separated into their brands. So while we're getting to those cattle towns, while we're on this long cattle drive that looks like that, all of our cattle are just all mixed up. We don't care who's with who, everybody, because you need lots of cowboys to get these cattle to those places. And then when they come into those cities, they will separate and then they'll get paid. And then the fun part starts. The cowboys get paid. Oh, wait, let me go back. Sorry. The cowboys will get paid. So these cowboys have been on about 100 to 150 mile cattle drive. They're going to hit these big towns, and then they're going to get a pocket full of money, of which they spend on, guess what? Same thing. Sorry, Tipton, as the only guy in the room. Alcohol and women. And that's what will create this Wild West kind of town with these wild cowboys who are 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 years old with a pocket full of money and in these towns where people are ready to take their money. The end of the open range, and again, that open range, remember in our movie, Frontier House, that cattle range that cattle drive that came right through, that's what this would have been about. So it's going to last for about 10 years after the Civil War. So it's going to last until about 1875. And what happens with that is barbed wire. We're going to have farmers come out. We're going to have sheepers. I guess that's what you call them, sheep ranchers. I don't know. And they're going to put up barbed wire. They're going to start marking off their land. And obviously that doesn't do well with open range. We're going to have horrific feuds between cattle ranchers and sheepers. And we're going to have people shooting each other about this. The other part of this, the flip side of this, is beef was very, very expensive on the East Coast because it was very difficult to get. As we create both an ease of transportation, railroad, and all these cattle going to market, beef prices drop. And because they drop, that sets up a bad economic system for those ranchers. There's going to be really, really cold winters, and then eventually that railroad's going to come to Texas, and we don't need to drive our cattle up to Dodge City or Kansas City. And then what happens, there's the cattle in the snow. The snow in that part of Texas is a really different kind of snow because it doesn't stick to anything. It's just a really dry, flaky snow. So it's not like our snow where you get ice, but it's like the cold is so penetrating because there's no like wind blocks or anything. Some of the coldest places that I've been have been like in these West Texas desert places where there's just nothing to hold the heat in and it's freezing cold. So our last little look at our West is farmers and homesteaders. And we, again, saw in our Frontier House that Homestead Act that gave settlers 160 acres. They had to live on it for 5 years. They had to plant trees. They had to dig wells. They had to build roads. But it was really, really hard. And we just saw a little teeny tiny bit of it in our movie. But it was really difficult and hard to exist in those places. We also have a group of people leaving the South. African Americans are going to come from the South and they're going to head west, and they're going to head west to Kansas, and they're called exodusters. They established a contract for freed slaves to sign up. They've agreed to all these different rules. They all pooled their money together, and they began building towns in Kansas. And there are very, very prosperous large African American communities in Kansas that can trace their life back to these exodusters that are leaving. If any of you ever read any of the Little House on the Prairie books, there was the one Little House on the Prairie by the banks of Plum Creek where they had a sod house that they built out of sod and built into the side of the house. This is kind of what this is built out of. This is a sod house. If you could get closer, you could see what looks like bricks are really bricks of dirt and sod. It's a dirt house, and you could have that in a place where it only rains about 10 inches a year, where the dirt is like a brick. The only flip side is you got little wheelie worm bugs on the inside. But again, it's a hard life that people are living out in that west area. And hard life, very isolated, very desolate, not surrounded by a lot of people in that area either. The Morrill Act in 1862 gives land grants to set up agricultural schools, and this is where Purdue University begins its long history as a land grant school in 1862. Competition and conflict, again, the West was very, very diverse, much more diverse than any other parts of the United States at this time, which again tends to lead to a little bit of conflict. Chinese, Irish, Mexican, American Indians, German, so we have conflict between nationalities, and that happens, but not as much as the conflict between different occupations. Cowboys fighting sheep herders fighting farmers. That violence is much, much more confrontational and oftentimes much more violent, and usually ends in death for one group over the other. So now we got to end this frontier. And the end of the frontier ends in Oklahoma. So Oklahoma was the last Indian territory, and the oil is found in Oklahoma, and so now we're going to give away land in Oklahoma. And this is a way of giving away land that gives this idea of what will become the Oklahoma Sooners. And so what happened, and in 1890, the census is declared closed. So in 1890, everyone registered for the land grab in Oklahoma, and they got a flag. They get a white flag, and the land grab was the next day, everybody's going to line up, we're going to shoot a gun, and everyone's just going to head off and find their territory and stick their flag in it, and that's your land. Free. The only thing you had to pay for was the flag, and it's your land. As always, in the lovely United States of America, there are always people that try to get around the rules. And so the night before, a whole bunch of people set out to find the best land and to camp there overnight. And as soon as they started to see people coming their way, they would pop up and stick their flag in. And so they were called Sooners. They ended up getting that land sooner than the others. And thus begins a whole Oklahoma Sooners kind of territory. Okay? Questions about any of that? All right, so the last thing that we're working on is that reading of William Henry Jackson about the environment in the West, and he is a photographer, so he's going to go take pictures of the West. I did already tell you guys that we don't take a test on this chapter. We do a project. I'll talk about that tomorrow. So please make sure tomorrow you look at the short video that explains the project. It's not a lecture. It just explains the project, okay? All right, any questions? Do what, honey?
Is it the infograph thing?
Yes. It's one of my favorite things. I love that project. It's fairly simple to figure out, but just to make sure you're paying attention. All right. And that's what we'll do on on Monday and Tuesday. So I won't see you guys until 2 weeks, November 30th. Monday and Tuesday is this project. So I'll explain it tomorrow. And then Monday, Tuesday, that's what you guys will do. So there's nothing else. Those of you that get things done quick, you'll be done and have that finished and ready to turn in. I like your glasses. Have you always had those?
Yeah, I wear contacts. I'm like,
Okay. They're really cute. They look cute.
I don't like them that much.
She what?
I don't really like them that much. That's why I don't wear them.
Oh, well, they're really cute. Okay. Anybody have questions?